Good afternoon, everyone. When it became apparent that we needed a substitute speaker for today, I turned to Peter and I said, what about you? You do talks all the time. Lots of people have heard you talk. Very few people in this room have heard you speak. And he said, but I don't want to make the whole afternoon about me. And I said, that's not a problem. You just need someone else to run the show. Go ahead. Oop.
Nice job.
So, of course, it takes at least two people to do any job half as well as Peter would do it. So here we are. And the first thing you need if you're going to cosplay someone else, right, is you need the right outfit. And this is the Peter Blau outfit. Now, many of you are familiar with this within this room. And a few of you may have seen this outfit elsewhere, but it's important to fully appreciate at the outset just how significant costume is in this context. Think for a moment. If you were in New York City and you were in trouble, you needed help, you were afraid or worried, you're standing in Times Square, you're lost, you've been mugged, something has gone wrong, what do? The first thing you would do is you would look around for someone on a horse, right? That is sort of the symbol of security, safety, justice, whatever, right? In New York City, when you are lost and in trouble. Or imagine yourself as a small child. You need to cross the street to get to your elementary school. What do? You look around for that strong, brave person wearing the bright orange vest, right? Who will help you across the street. Or you're a tourist anywhere in the world and you're lost. You look around. You need direction. You need guidance. What do you see? You see someone holding an umbrella up in the air. And you say, well, that may not be my tour guide, but I'm sure they know how to get to the nearest public restroom, or what have you, right? These jackets, these Sherlock Snoopy neckties, they are the mounted police officer, they are the tangerine or lime green vest, they are the umbrella of the tourist for the Sherlockian world. Anyone, anywhere in the world who is at a Sherlockian event and needs justice, needs guidance, needs direction, all they need to do is look for the blue vest, the blue jacket. That is Peter Blau.
There you go. Nice to meet you. So, because Peter is our speaker today, I felt that he needed an introduction the way we would do for any speaker. And I will tell you that the first time I ever heard of Peter Blau is going back almost 50 years. And I was part of a planning committee, and they kept saying, if Peter Blau, and it was the first time, this is the master's class in Philadelphia, and they kept saying, if Peter Blau comes, it's like an endorsement. If Peter Blau comes, other people will come. He just had that kind of reputation that where he went, people felt that it was a good thing to do, and they came as well. I will tell you that over the years that I've known him, I've heard him speak many times. Sometimes it's a formal presentation, as the one you're going to see today. Sometimes there's just stories that he tells wherever he might be. He has spoken in many different countries. He's spoken in Japan, in England, in Switzerland, in Canada, and all around the United States. Everybody wants to hear Peter give a talk. So without further ado, oh no, excuse me, I did have a couple of things I want to add, sorry. Can we edit that out later? Anyway, Peter's been honored many times. I thought to tell you, when I was making up his introduction sheet, his first slide, I said, do you want any initials at the end of it? And he said, no, I never put initials on. And I thought about that, and I thought, if he had to put on the initials for every organization that claims him as a member, it would be slide after slide after slide. There's just no point. But there are a couple of honors that he has had recently in the last couple of years that I will share. One is that in 2019, the Baker Street Irregulars had worked for 2 years pulling together what they call a Festschrift. It was in honor of Peter's going to be 60 years in 2019 as a Sherlockian. Of course, the number 60 is very significant because there's 60 stories. In 2022, he was the first recipient of the Baker Street Irregular Susan Rice Mentorship Award for all of the work he has done encouraging others to enjoy the world of Sherlock Holmes. And in May of last year, it was slightly delayed, he was honored by the Sherlock Holmes Society of London just because he's a wonderful Sherlockian. I will tell you that we get phone calls, I know he gets emails from people all over the world with questions, and he answers them all with grace and good humor. So with that, I will now introduce you to our today's speaker, Peter Blau.
If you want to hear a really good story, ask Bev what she was expecting the first time she met me.
She was expecting what she met you?
You want to come tell him now?
Sure.
Just gonna switch this on, I'm ruining it, but that's fine, it'll work. Just
All right.
Okay. So getting back to this planning meeting of the master's class, and they kept talking about Peter and talking about Peter and talking about Peter. And I knew no one, I knew nothing about the Sherlockian world, I knew none of this. And finally, after about 3 of these meetings, I said, who is this Peter Blau anyway? And the way he was described to me was that he was this incredible intellectual, that he had a collection to kill for, and that he had had half the women in Washington. So he didn't come to that first event. I did see him a couple months later when we had our second event, and I truly was expecting I thought he was a swinger, you know? I expected to see, this is the late 1970s. I expected, you know, he gets up there to talk, and he's wearing a nice sports jacket and a nice tie, and he's telling a funny story. Not what I expected. I thought he was going to have the shirt open to the waist and the gold chains going across the chest. That wasn't it. Do you want to tell the rest of the story?
No,
Okay.
it's another good story. Ask Bev to tell you about the ears. Okay. Am I working? All right. I want to apologize. I don't really give talks. I just tell stories. But I was invited, well, I was summoned to Dallas last month when they had a Lone Star Homes conference in honor of the installation of Don Hobbs's wonderful collection of foreign translations of the Sherlock Holmes stories at Sullivan Methodist University. And they asked me to talk about the future lies ahead, how we got here and where we're going. And I was fortunate because I know how we got here. I'm not sure I can tell you where we're going. It's not that easy to predict the past, let alone the future. But as they said, I have some thoughts. So here are my thoughts. Now, excuse me. I told them that an expert is anyone who's more than 100 miles from a home. And an authority is an expert who's brought slides. I can't be an expert on not more than 100 miles from homes, but I did sort of bring slides. I don't do PowerPoint. Fortunately, I've got someone who does PowerPoint. So there's my first slide. So I don't know if I really am an expert or not. I want to tell you how wonderful slides can be. There was a John Bennett Shaw conference some years ago in Hoboken. That's John. And one of the speakers thought it'd be very nice to pay tribute to a wonderful artist who'd done tremendous illustrations for note cards and magazines. And he had a whole set of slides prepared. And so he asked the artist's widow for permission. And she said no, because she was afraid that would destroy her husband's copyright. So poor Harlan Umansky, in a room full of 100 people, is up front on the stage holding up these note cards so that everybody can see them. But here's Norman Chattel's artwork. If you can't read it, the placemat says, "Do not clean your boots." Norm had a wonderful sense of humor. Now, how did we get here? The Sherlockian world came into being. Helen Wilson wrote about the chronology of the stories in an article called "The Life of Sherlock Holmes" in Cornell magazine in November 1898. As far as we know, she was the first Sherlockian scholar. A man named Frank Sidgwick wrote about the Hound of the Baskervilles at fault in the Cambridge Review in 1902. And the word Sherlockian, sorry, the word Sherlockian seems to have first appeared in print in the February 1903 issue of the Bookman magazine published in New York. In the Bookman's letterbox, quote, "A crisp little note comes to us from Bath, New York. The lady who wrote it has really found us out. She is a true Sherlockian." And that was just the start. Now, the founding of the Baker Street Irregulars in 1934 was little noticed except for the readers of Christopher Morley. We were founded in his column, The Bowling Green, and the Saturday Review of Literature. It was, for us, a truly important event. Many of us here tonight are members of what Morley called a whiskey and sodality. But the society today is largely, hardly the informal small group of Morley's friends, people he thought of as kinsprits, his coined word for kindred spirits. Excuse me. So the BSI began to change in the 1940s, thanks to Edgar W. Smith. We all owe a great debt to Edgar Smith. When he succeeded Morley, he awarded the first investiture to a woman, the first investiture to someone who wasn't a citizen of the United States, and the first of the young punks. There was Tony Montag, and then there was Chris Steinbrunner, and then there was me. There I am, 1959, receiving my investiture from Jim Araldi. Well, here we are. Now, thanks to Julian Wolfe and Tom Six Jr. and Mike Whalen and now Mike Keene, who have helped create a different Sherlockian world, full of Sherlockian societies like ours, with many meetings and conferences and horse races and excursions, and so many that no one can keep up with them or even dream of attending them all. Now, the Baker Street Irregulars have the Baker Street Press, one of their books, and still the Baker Street Journal, started in the 1940s, still going strong. There are other publishers offering readers Sherlockian scholarship and pseudo-scholarship. So we persist to poach a rallying cry from another group. I'm sure we'll continue to do so. Now, I was asked to predict what the Sherlockian world will be like in 50 years. And there's an easy answer. I have no idea. Now, 50 years ago, in 1973, I was sitting at my desk in Washington, typing letters, and what came to be my newsletter on an electric typewriter, in an era when long-distance telephone calls were charged by the minute, and Sherlockians relied on the postal service. Holmes and Watson were Basil Rathbone and Nigel Bruce in late-night reruns on television. There were a handful of networks and many movie theaters. A bit later in the 1970s, some of us to be able to record television broadcasts on video cassettes. We had record players and phonograph records that played at various speeds. The 1970s saw the first real explosion of interest in Sherlock Holmes when the Royal Shakespeare Company, bing, bing, there we go, revived the William Gillette play. Coincided with the publication of Nicholas Meyer's The 7% Solution. And this really was the Sherlock Holmes boom, because the movie came out and there was no going back. That was a time when fledgling authors who couldn't find a real publisher could turn to vanity publishers whom you paid to produce and allegedly promote your book. Now we have a flood of Sherlockian authors who are self-published via print on demand. There's Kindle and other platforms for ebooks. There's something called the Archive of Our Own. It's a website where, as of this morning, you'll find more than 135,000 Sherlockian pastiches. That's 1,000 more than there were last month when I first gave this talk. There's YouTube and fan films and more dignified Sherlockian channels on YouTube, hundreds of cable and streaming channels, and blogs. Now, I write my newsletter with a keyboard and a desktop computer, and I have a browser and email and Facebook and Zoom and access to all sorts of things I've not yet found time for, such as Twitter and Instagram. So, 1973. I could never have predicted what the next 50 years would bring. The Turing test was a big deal. It was described as a test of a machine's ability to exhibit intelligent behavior equivalent to or indistinguishable from that of a human. Now we have artificial intelligence. The Orville, which is a wonderful series on Hulu. It's in many ways an homage to the original Star Trek. One of the treads in the series involves the Kalons, sentient robots who have sent Isaac, there's Isaac, as an observer to the Orville. It develops that the Kalons, terribly mistreated by their creator, rebelled and exterminated all of the humans on their planet and have gone to war with the Galactic Union. Now, obviously, the creators of the Kalons were not familiar with Isaac Asimov's three rules of robotics. Sorry. There we go. I don't have the last page of my speech. I'm going to ad lib. I can't tell you what the three laws for robotics are. They were created in 1942 and basically were designed by Isaac Asimov so that robots would not wipe out the human race. Isaac Asimov was a member of the Baker Street Writers. He was in Washington some years ago for the American Booksellers Association annual meeting. We had lunch, and it was long enough ago that he told me how he acquired his first computer. He got a letter from a magazine, computer magazine, that said, we would like you to write an article about how you use a computer to write your stories. And Isaac wrote back and said, I don't use a computer. I don't own a computer. And they called him and said, we're going to take care of that. And the next day, a stack of boxes arrived full of the computer. And all Isaac had to do was put them together, which he did. And of course, the computer didn't work. So Isaac said, I'm going to try it again. And he did. Put this whole thing together again, and it didn't work. And he let it sit for a day. And then he said to his wife, Janet, I'm going to do this once more. And if it doesn't work, I'm sending this whole damn thing back. He said, and it heard me. It worked. So that's how he got his first computer. Well, here we are. I really don't know what the Sherlockian world is going to be like in 50 years, but I've been called the 2,000-year-old Sherlockian. And I plan to be here to find out. Thank you. Any questions? Really? Okay. Ross?
If you don't mind, 50 years is a long time. I look forward to being here to hear you say in 50 years, I told you so, right? When you haven't told us a darn thing. But no, if you were to survey the tools we have now, which one, the Twitter or any of these things, which one do you think has changed our experience of Sherlock Holmes the most?
It's not a tool. It's societies like the Red Circle. This is something that didn't exist until Christopher Morley got together with a few of his friends in 1934. Now there are hundreds of Sherlockian societies all over the world. Sherlock Holmes is a unifier. John Bennett Shaw and I used to claim that we could go anywhere a scheduled jetliner could land in the United States, and there would be a Sherlockian within 1 hour's drive. Only failed once. When I was in Butte, Montana. And the nearest Sherlockian was 110 miles away. It took them an hour and a half to get to the airport, which is what they do in Montana. And that included being stopped by a state policeman for speeding. But, anywhere. I was once in Rhodesia on a busman's holiday, and I unpacked and came down the lobby, and it was full of geologists. It turned out that the Rhodesian and the South African Geological Surveys were having a joint meeting. And the first person I ran into was the head of my geology department at college. And introduced me to another geologist, Dr. Leslie Kent, of the Geological Survey of South Africa. We shook hands, and he said, Mr. Blau, it is an honor to me to meet an American. And I said, that's from a Sherlock Holmes story. I'm a member of the Baker Street Writers. And he said, what? And I said, you just quoted from a Sherlock Holmes story. And he said, yes. He said, but I've been doing this for years, and nobody has ever known that. So wherever you go, there are Sherlockians, and it's great. When you travel, find people who share your interests, anywhere. But thank you for coming to the Red Circle. It's fun. Revived it in 1970, and we're still going, and we're going to keep going. So come to our next meeting in September. Anybody else? Yes.
Other people have probably heard this, but I never have. What first got you so interested in Sherlock Holmes? Because I assume that's been a while.
Yes. Wow, let's see. My father was a book collector, and he bought books from a bookkeeper named Ben Abramson at the Argus Bookshop. Well, my father lived in Cleveland, and Ben was in Chicago. Well, during the war, we wound up in Western Massachusetts, and Ben was in New York City. So my father was going to New York City on business and took me along because he wanted to meet Ben Abramson. And it was the first time I'd ever been in a bookshop. Been in a bookstore, but it was a bookshop. And Ben said to me, go find a book you'd like to read while I talk to your father. And it was wonderful. I was climbing these shelves and finally came back to Ben with a book. And I said, I want to read this. And I looked at it, said, the poems and stories of Fitzjames O'Brien. He said, why do you want to read this? And I said, it's got 2 stories in it that I've read in school. What was it? And then Diamond Lens. And they're spooky, and I want to read more. And Ben said, best reason to buy a book. He said, your father's going to buy the book. Father looked at him, $27.50. Well, in 1944, you could buy a suit and a pair of shoes for that. And my father said, Ben said it's a first edition. My father said, well, Peter doesn't need first editions. And Ben said, everybody needs first editions. Buy him the book. Well, if you come to our house, I can show you the book. 2 years later, Ben wrote, well, he would write and he said, dear Peter, I'm sending you a package of books you'll enjoy reading. Tell your father to send me $10. And he was always right. I enjoyed the books. My father always sent $10. And then he wrote and said, dear Peter, I publish a magazine you will enjoy reading. Tell your father to send me $10. And it was the Baker Street Journal. And it was full of articles by people who are having fun playing this game, pretending that Sherlock Holmes was real. And I wrote to them. And they wrote back. And they didn't care a bit that I was a teenager. They just made me feel welcome. So I like the Sherlockians, not Sherlock Holmes. So you're all Sherlockians, or you will be. Yes.
I've never attended a meeting before, so it's a pleasure to be here. Never met you before, but I'm a little distressed to hear. Did you just say they were pretending that Sherlock Holmes was real? I'm a little confused.
You, Steve, are in the right place.
So now that I've gotten over that shock, give me a second. Can I have like 1,000 questions I could ask you that may not be relevant here too. So so
Just keep coming to more meetings.
So since you've been involved in the Sherlock world for many, many years, you've seen many, many actors playing the roles of Holmes and Watson. Just your own personal perspective on, do you go out and see everything that's out there? Is there a particular actor that you love playing Holmes or Watson? We all have our personal favorites. I'm curious as to yours.
I like everything, no matter how awful it is. There's always something that is amusing. And you come to me and you tell me that you just saw the worst Sherlock Holmes film ever. And I'll tell you something that's fun about it. As for Sherlock Holmes not being real, Monsignor Ronald Knox started this grand game that we play, pretending that Sherlock Holmes is real, is a real world. And we've been doing it ever since. Christopher Morley enjoyed playing it. And we got to the point where Arthur Conan Doyle's son, Adrian, took offense at our maintaining that the stories were written by Watson and that Conan Doyle was the literary agent. And Adrian went to war against us. Adrian had no sense of humor. So all that meant was the Baker Street Irregulars tripled their efforts. And we've been doing it ever since. William Asbury Gould wrote a wonderful biography of Sherlock Holmes of Baker Street. And a neighbor of mine in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, I asked me about Sherlock Holmes, and I loaned her this book. And she read the book, and 10 days later brought it back and said, I didn't know that Sherlock Holmes was a real person. And I said, well, there's others who doubt it. And she said, it says here that his son is alive in New York. And I said, yes. And she said, he had a son with Irene Adler, who inherited his uncle's gargantuan physique and his father's intellectual prowess. And his name is Nero Wolfe. And I said, yes. And she said, he's in New York. And I said, yes. Have you gone to see him? And I said, no. And she said, why not? It's Sherlock Holmes. You should, you know. And I said, what can I say to him? Excuse me, are you really Sherlock Holmes's bastard boy? Oh, she said, no, that was it. So yeah, we play the game. It's fun.
Can I ask one other question?
Yes.
This undercuts.
What's your third question?
This undercuts my comment about Holmes not being real. So I have heard different versions of this story, and I was wondering if you could tell me what's accurate. The relationship between Conan Doyle's decision to kill Sherlock Holmes and then bring him back, and the pressure he was under to do that, and whether or not Queen Victoria had any involvement in that decision. Because I've heard some story about how she was a Holmes fan. And is that true, or that's all?
No. I never knew Victoria. So I don't know what she thought about Sherlock Holmes. No one has ever quoted anything she wrote. But I can tell you what brought Sherlock Holmes back from the dead. And that was something called dollars. Publishers kept saying, we want more stories. And Conan Doyle kept saying, no. He wanted to do more important things, historical novels. Well, William Judd came up with this play and brought it to London in 1901, just at the time that Conan Doyle had started writing a book about a spectral hound on Dartmoor. And he never said so. But I believe that Conan Doyle realized that William Gillette was coming to London with this play. And there was money to be made if he turned this story into a Sherlock Holmes story. So he did. And Out of the Baskervilles was the first bestseller in the United States. 50,000 copies in the first 2 weeks. And then everybody kept saying, we want more homes. See, Anna the Baskerville was set back before the Reichenbach. And finally, a publisher of Collier's magazine wired Conan Doyle and said, name your price. And Conan Doyle quoted a price which is more than any author had ever been paid for a short story. Figuring how to get rid of them. And they wired back and said, we'll take 10. So he had to bring, thanks to Collier's magazine, he's still with us. I hope. Okay. Anybody else? One more. Gary.
What's the E in your name,
England. Usually I say excellent. Sometimes I say egregious. But it's really England. My mother, that's my mother's maiden name. She always had a wonderful time when they'd go to England and show her passport. They'd say, oh, you're in England. She said, they named the country after me. Okay. Yes. I'm sorry?
Your tribute?
Yes.
Okay, I need to bring this over.
Okay. Obviously, you all know I'm not Paxton Whitehead. And he was to be our guest speaker. And unfortunately, he fell down the stairs at his home in Arlington and never recovered. And he started acting in Britain in 1956, joined the Royal Shakespeare Company in 1958, went on to a long career, stage, screen, and television. And I played Holmes twice, the first in Crucifer Blood. Oh, the other one. That's better. In 1978 and 79, and Irene Adler, in case you don't recognize her, was a beginning actress named Glenn Close. And then he went on to do The Mask of Moriarty in 1996 and 1997. And he's sort of going to be with us now because we've got video. In 2016, he appeared in a New York Historical Society event that was devoted to Shakespeare, Shaw, and Sherlock. And he read from all three. And he did two things that were Sherlockian.
We turn next to two marvelous renditions of Sherlock Holmes in The Crucifer of Blood and in The Mask of Moriarty. And Paxton Whitehead, being with us tonight, is going to reveal why it is that we love Sherlock Holmes and will give us an illustration of the deductive powers of the great detective.
Observation shows me, Watson, that you've been to the Wigmore Street post office this morning, but deduction lets me know that when you were there, you dispatched a telegram. Right on both points, but I confess I don't see how you arrived at it. It was a sudden impulse on my part, and I mentioned it to no one. It is simplicity itself, so absurdly simple that an explanation is superfluous, and yet may serve to define the limits of observation and of deduction. Observation tells me that you have a little reddish mold adhering to your instep. Just opposite the Wigmore Street post office, they have taken up the pavement and thrown up some earth which lies in such a way that it is difficult to avoid treading in it in entering. The earth is of this peculiar reddish tint which is found, as far as I know, nowhere else in the neighborhood. So much is observation. The rest is deduction. How then did you deduce the telegram? Well, of course I knew that you'd not written a letter since I sat opposite you all morning. I see also in your open desk there that you've a sheet of stamps and a thick bundle of postcards. What could you go into the post office for then but to send a wire? Eliminate all other factors, and the one which remains must be the truth. In this case, it's certainly so. The thing, however, is, as you say, of the simplest. Would you think me impertinent if I were to put your theories to a more severe test? On the contrary, it would prevent me from taking a second dose of cocaine. And I should be delighted to look into any problems which you might submit to me.
Great. We think it's apt to conclude this evening of Shaw, Shakespeare, and Sherlock on a kind of a sentimental note with our illustrious actor who will read a poem written by Vincent Starrett that I think captures the mood of Baker Street, the gaslit illusion, and the cobblestones. Paxton.
Here dwell together still two men of note, who never lived, and so can never die. How very near they seem, yet how remote, that age before the world went all awry. But still the game's afoot for those with ears, attuned to catch the distant view halloo. England is England yet, for all our fears. Only those things the heart believes are true. The yellow fog swirls past the window pane as night descends upon this fabled street. A lonely hansom splashes through the rain, and ghostly gas lamps fail at 20 feet. Here, though the world explode, these two survive, and it is always 1895.
I was fortunate enough, wise enough maybe, to have lunch with Paxton Whitehead earlier in June in Arlington. He was really looking forward to being with us. I'm sorry we can only do it by video, but I'd like to ask you all to lift a glass in honor of Paxton Whitehead.